Would you go to an amusement park that had real live dinosaurs? I wouldn't, but hey, I'm not everybody. I have bad opinions. We are here with the drive-in series. We are back with a Halloween drive-in. We are 3 in now, doing a theme of horror films that aren't always thought of as horror. Today we will be talking about the one and only Jurassic Park. I can't wait to talk about this one and why it's actually terrifying to think of a world where dinosaurs are roaming free and you might just get eaten. And why people don't think of that as terrifying is beyond me. But today, we're going to talk about it. I'm Joshua Noel. I'm here with the one and only Andy Walsh, our resident host scientist of the show. This is going to be a good one. We're going to have fun, but we're going to jump right into this so that we don't skimp on any of the content. We need to get to the real stuff. Andy, let's say for funsies, neither of us have ever seen Jurassic Park. We hear that it's playing in the drive-in. So I grab you, we get in the car, we drive over, we watch this film on the screen. As soon as the movie ends, you look at me, and what's the first thing you say?
Man, those dinosaur effects have held up for 30 years.
Oh man, I don't even know what I'd say. Like the first time I saw it, because like in a weird way, just because of like the way the music and everything's done for the film, it feels like it's suspenseful, but it's magical. So I just be like, I think I might just look at you and just be, wow. Like I might be a little bit speechless. Wow might be the only thing you get out of me.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I'm a little biased. I love these films. But yeah, it's a fun one. Before we get too much into it, though, if for some reason someone has never seen Jurassic Park, Andy, what is this movie about?
Sure. So the basic premise is that a rich business person is trying to build a theme park in which living dinosaurs are the main attraction. And he believes that this is possible because they can extract dinosaur DNA from mosquitoes that have been preserved in amber for 100 million years, give or take. And they can use that dinosaur DNA to clone new dinosaurs and raise them to adulthood and make them the attractions of the theme park, kind of zoo safari ride kind of thing. And, so the film starts and the paleontologist, he recruits some paleontologists to give him advice on this project. And they think it's all, pie in the sky nonsense. And then they arrive at the theme park and lo and behold, he's actually already done it. They have dozens of species of dinosaurs already alive and walking around on this island. They are days, weeks. It's a little bit fuzzy, but soon close to trying to open this theme park. And of course, and naturally, because it's a film, there needs to be some conflict and some drama, and so chaos ensues, and the dinosaurs do not behave, and the opening of the theme park might be in doubt.
Yeah, all that's good stuff. I think what's fun is like, having watched this first as a kid, you just kind of accept everything and you're like, yeah, dinosaurs, cool. But then like the more I grow up and I'm not as science, so what's the word? I'm not as up on the science as like Will or some of the other hosts, and certainly not as much up on as you. So some of the stuff I'm hearing, I'm like, okay, we're taking DNA from a fossilized mosquito. Okay, that seems a little far-fetched. And then we're making clones of things that don't exist. And for some reason, this is what dinosaurs look like, even though most of what I hear about dinosaurs, they don't look like this. Like, what scientifically, like what's going on in this movie, Andy? Are they just like making up stuff so we're supposed to ignore it and just have fun? Or is there anything to it?
Right. So you can see where the ideas kind of stem from reality, right? So the film comes out in the early 90s. I forget exactly when the book was written, but not too long beforehand. The technology to extract and manipulate DNA, to insert new DNA into other organisms was a new field, right? We were starting to engineer things like bacteria that could grow human insulin, right, by putting in the gene for human insulin into bacteria, right? And so, it's not, you can see where Michael Crichton kind of gets that inspiration, right? We're not too many years away at that time removed from the cloning of whole animals. Dolly the sheep, I forget exactly the year. I want to say it was later in the 90s. but Dolly the sheep comes along not too long after. And so this idea of...
Wait, there's a sheep? Is that in the movie, or is that like...
No, I'm sorry. This is real
life thing?
Yes.
What's the sheep?
Dolly the sheep was the first cloned mammal, I believe.
They've cloned a sheep?
Yeah, like 30 years ago.
Yeah, and okay. Wild. Sorry. Okay, go on.
Yeah, no worries. So there's some real life science, some actual science that is not a million miles away from this, but it's still pretty. The distance is still likely impassable, right? So extracting 100 million year old DNA from a mosquito, very unlikely that it would survive. DNA is a fairly fragile molecule. We have gotten what appear to be some protein sequences from dinosaur tissue, some fragments of protein sequences. We can get DNA sequences from things like Neanderthal fossils, right? So 100,000 years old DNA has now been extracted and sequenced, but 100 million year old DNA is really pushing it. And even if you were able to get something from a mosquito, you wouldn't necessarily you wouldn't get an entire intact genome of the DNA. You would get little of a dinosaur. You would get little tiny fragments that if anything survived, that would be it. So you'd have little snippets here and there, but not the entire genome. And they kind of acknowledge that, right? In the little Mr. DNA or cartoon, where they talk about the process by which they bring these dinosaurs back to life. They talk about how they don't get complete genomes, and so they have to fill in some things with frog DNA. And that's kind of a stretch, right? You could conceive of doing that, right? We have the tools to mix and match that DNA, but we don't know that it would result in anything viable. And, the evolutionary distance between a dinosaur from 65, 75, 100 million years ago and a living frog is pretty huge. We don't know that they would be compatible in any way.
Yeah.
You also have the problem of what kind of egg do you put this in, right? So when we cloned Dolly the sheep, we took the egg cell from one sheep and the DNA genome from a different sheep and put that into the egg cell that had its own genome removed. But you're still talking about a genome and an egg cell of the same species, right? If you took dinosaur DNA and put it into a frog or a lizard egg cell, there would be compatible issues with the proteins, and the factors that are inside that egg cell wouldn't necessarily interact properly with the dinosaur DNA to result in a viable embryo or a viable dinosaur. So you can see that where the bits and pieces came from real science, but the practical realities are that resurrecting a dinosaur in this fashion is probably not ever going to be feasible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, you do see in like some of the later sequels and stuff too, where like they even just straight up create new dinosaurs because genomes work however we want. We'll piece it together. Here's a monster.
Right. Yeah. We'll just mix and match, and fine. We know exactly where the gene for camouflage is, or the gene for this hunting instinct, or that predatory feature, and we'll just splice them and dice them the way that we want to. Yeah. So
there's a little bit of science, but there's still a lot of like you got to suspend your senses. What you do know.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Michael Crichton. He was the writer of the book, and then also wrote on the show. Is that correct? Okay.
I don't know how much he contributed to the screenplay for the film, but he definitely wrote the novel that it was based on.
Steven Spielberg was the producer, and then John Williams is the one who made the music so magical.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of good pieces that go into this film that make it so incredible.
Sure.
But while we're doing this particular series, one question we are asking of every movie in this series, which be interesting, like maybe it's just because the science is so far-fetched, but like, why do you think people don't always think of this movie as a horror film? Because, like, realistically, horror is just, it's a concept that would be horrifying if it were real. And, like, in my mind, being trapped on an island of living dinosaurs that want to rip me apart is terrifying. But I don't think of Jurassic Park as a horror film,
Yeah, it's an interesting question because, you could boil it down. It's Alien in Paradise, right? A greedy corporation tries to exploit a predator that it doesn't really understand, and the employees are trapped with the consequences, and are picked off one by one. I think there is something about the tone and the mood of the film, right? There are long stretches. We are in paradise. We're on a tropical island, so there's a lot of bright sunlight. There's a lot of action in the daytime. There are, kids who are heroes, or main characters of the film who we get to spend some time with and become endeared to or not, depending on your on how Ellen Grantish you are.
Yeah, Jeff Goldblum's fantastic in this.
Yeah. And so, it kind of like superficially doesn't look like a horror film. It's a little bit more, it's a little bit more upbeat. It's a little bit brighter in tone and feeling. It's a Spielberg PG-13 film, so it's not as gory and it doesn't have the most visceral, and bloody deaths of the, even though some pretty gnarly things happen to people, it's more implied than shown in a way that, if this were an R-rated horror film, you would see some fairly gnarly things, I imagine.
Oh yeah, I can easily see a world where they make this same movie off the same book, and it is like hard R, terrifying horror. Like I could see it, but like you said, like a lot of it has to do with the mood and the tone. And even like for myself, thinking of like me as a kid with this movie, and this is like a lot of my background really is, I remember bits and pieces of seeing this as a kid, but mostly my connection with Jurassic Park is the part of the of Islands of Adventure, Universal's Islands of Adventure. When I was a kid, I grew up in Florida, so we went to Universal a lot, and I remember riding the water ride. It was so scary, that part where the dinosaurs and it gets dark all of a sudden and they're like jumping out. Like for me, like that was actually terrifying as a kid. And now I'm watching it going, man, they need to update these animatronics. but also at the same time, it's like, no matter how bad a day it is, if you're at this park, like I have so many memories just pulling up to the gate and you hear that do 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 do, and like all of a sudden, like you're just filled with hope and inspiration, and the day just feels better. And right. I'm like, it's hard to like connect the dots here of scary dinosaurs in the dark water ride, and also the most hopeful, inspiring music and scenes, like it's beautiful movie, beautiful scenes in the park, and it's like it's just hard to connect the dots a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think you touch on something there with the John Williams score that that I think that's also part of it too. It's so lush, it's so beautiful. It's more inspiring than creepy or terrifying for most of its cues. And I think that also hints at the music to Jurassic Park, and especially that that opening gate sequence, borrows a lot from King Kong, which is another movie that you could say, and the Max Steiner score for King Kong. And, that's another movie that you could say, well, why isn't this a horror movie, right? People are terrorized by a giant creature that they don't really understand. But, it's also more in that, like, action adventure kind of vein of we're going to someplace new, and that's exciting and interesting. And yes, it's risky and dangerous, but it's also thrilling and, imagination inspiring and all of those things. And so, I think I think Jurassic Park is reaching back to that earlier era where the unknown was thrilling and exciting and not always terrifying and dreadful.
Well said. Well, I mentioned a few times like some of my history as a kid with the parks and the movies, but what is some of your history with these movies? Have you like grew up with these, or
I was just about old enough. I didn't see the original film in the theaters, but I saw it fairly early on after it came out. It was kind of a big thing in high school. I think after we finished the AP exam in calculus, something like that, we got to watch the movie in class because there was still 3 weeks of school left or whatever. So I remember that being kind of a big deal. And I'd read the book. I went through a pretty big Michael Crichton phase in high school. Jurassic Park might have been the first one, but it was definitely one of the early ones. And so I was a pretty big fan, and like all kids, I had a dinosaur phase and was pretty into dinosaurs growing up. So that that appealed to me. I was already a fan of John Williams at the time from Superman and Star Wars and so forth, Indiana Jones, and so there was a lot that was exciting about that film. Didn't track so much with The Lost World, and Jurassic Park 3 kind of came at a time when we had fewer opportunities to see movies and so forth. And so for whatever reason, those passed me by a little bit. I think also just they weren't as well received at the time. But the newer films, I've been there, pretty much opening weekend to see all the newer films. My son has gotten to them as well as going back and watching the old ones. So that's been fun to kind of revisit them with him. And so overall, I think it's a pretty interesting series. I think it's they're more well done than not. And the original book is also interesting too. We talked a lot about the science, the biology of the dinosaurs, but actually a big concern on Michael Crichton's mind in writing the book, and this comes through somewhat in the Jeff Goldblum character, but it's an even bigger aspect of the book, is this idea of control, right? And what science tells us about what we can and cannot control, and that there's also emerging alongside genetic engineering at the time was this mathematics of chaos theory. And what that was showing us was that there are systems that we might be able to describe fairly well mathematically, but we're still limited in our ability to predict their outcomes and therefore to control their outcomes. And so that's something that gets explored a lot in the book, is just sort of what are the ramifications of a system where you might be able to write down a mathematical equation that perfectly describes what's going to happen, but the limitations of doing the calculations means that after a few time steps you have no idea what's going to happen, and so you can't really control the outcomes or influence the outcomes in a way that you will be able to predict. And so it's more a drama about that playing out, seeing how unintended consequences, nonlinearities, unexpected results can kind of spiral and build on each other so that small little problems turn into enormous failures. And that's really the science that is at the heart of the book. And the dinosaur cloning is just kind of the stuff on top of it to make for an interesting setting in which to explore that idea.
Yeah. You gotta love the line, "Life will find a way." It's good stuff. And like, what can we control and what can't we control? And even I think the question of like, just because we can doesn't mean we should kind of comes up, and for me, this is, Halloween time. It makes me think of the Frankenstein story, right? Of like, just because I can create life does not mean that I should create life. And what are the consequences of our actions? And what, like a lot of it, I think, comes down to like the human ego. So you have that like capitalist greed of, I'm going to make this amusement park, but you also have that ego of, I can do this thing. I am able to just put my mind to it and create dinosaurs. I am able to like just create my own human. I am God, as Dr. Frankenstein says, right? And it's just, I don't know, like that piece of it all, it rings very similar to me. I mean, maybe they're both like that science, horror, fiction, adventure kind of stuff, but it's also like, I feel like a lot of times that comes up in our stories a lot, and it kind of gets left out of our conversation sometimes in like real world or in our political conversations. And I don't know, maybe we should be talking about that a little bit more, of like, to what extent are we playing with stuff that we can't control?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And yeah, the similarities or the connections to Frankenstein are also there. And as the series has gone on, I think there's been they've drawn out that theme a little bit more strongly. One of the characters that has come back repeatedly is the B.D. Wong character, Dr. Wu from the first film, has come back. He's the scientist who's in charge of bringing the dinosaurs back through cloning. And yeah, he's exactly that kind of figure. Like it's more about ego and just proving what he can do and what is possible, more so than what will make a lot of money. Although he's not uninterested in the money aspect of it either. So yeah, I think I would push back a little bit in that I think sometimes a lot of our stories focus a little bit exclusively on the negative side of science, like that where science can only ever go wrong and scientists are only ever creating monsters and so forth. And I think that can feed into a negative impression of scientists in the science community and how science is done. But I think you're right that doesn't mean that there's no room or no need for asking those exact questions of can we do this? Should we do this? Who should be allowed to do this? Who should make these decisions? Who gets to control things? And what are the limits of what we can control are all important questions.
Yeah. I know when Will and I, which we borrowed heavily from your suggestions when we did that the atheist and agnostic, where we see atheists and agnostic believers in our fandoms. We did that on our YouTube page, and one of the things that really stood out was like how you have these characters that are like Tony Stark, Reed Richards, that are like, these are the science prototypes who are all very egotistical and kind of jerks. And sometimes you forget about like the Bruce Banners, who, you know, maybe he was forced to learn humility because he can literally turn into a monster. But you know, Bruce, I feel like, is like a more positive example of a scientist, which we don't always see a ton of. And yeah, I mean, that's sad, but movie's still a good movie. If you had to pick like a single scene in this film that you're like, this is the scene, and like you're trying to convince someone who's never seen Jurassic Park they should see it, and you're going to show them one scene that's going to convince them to watch the movie, what scene are you showing them from Jurassic Park?
I think I'd probably go with the kitchen sequence where the velociraptors are stalking the kids through the kitchen. It just, you know, it's so well done with some of the misdirections. You know, you as the audience are being fooled, even as the kids are fooling the velociraptors. You know, there's tension. There is, you know, excitement. There is, you know, getting to see, you know, the kids, you know, get one over on the dinosaurs. You know, the kids being successful, and so, you know, they're easy to root for in a film of you know, complicated and characters, a lot of whom are, you know, more than a little touched with ego, and, you know, definitely more gray than white hat kind of characters. You know, the kids, at least, you know, the kids are pretty easy to get behind, even if you find them a little cloying. Yeah. And so, yeah, I think that's maybe the sequence that I would go to.
Yeah. I think I'm with you. That's a great scene. If I have to pick another one, honestly, and this is going to actually be a good transition to our final question here, but when they first pull into the thing and the gates open and you have the music going and you just see these giant creatures grazing on plants, mostly walking around, and it's beautiful. And to me, like, that draws me in, not just because it's beautiful, but because it kind of explains to me why the series has lasted so long. Because, like, if you know that that's possible, yes, there have been terrible outcomes in every single movie, and the smart person would have probably just stopped. But also, I'm like, man, knowing that it's possible to see that kind of nature exist, it would be hard to let go of that. Like, I kind of get it. You know, like, to an extent, I'm like, I understand. And you know, I said that was going to lead to our last question here. That reminds me of, like, how some of the stuff is based on what in my opinion, what is like good stuff, where like we're trying to preserve nature. We're bringing something back that was extinct and trying to find a way to preserve it. Like, some parts of that, like, I'm like, I get. So it makes me think of like a lot of modern day zoos, aquariums, even amusement parks that have animals, where you had to have this debate where a lot of people hate it because they're mistreating animals, all this kind of stuff. Not dismissing it. I'm just kind of lumping it together. Hopefully you know what I'm talking about. And then you have people who are more in my camp, who I'm like, I like some of the good that it's doing, because yes, there is bad. I'm not going to say that the bad does not exist, but also we're saving some animals that would have otherwise gone extinct. If you look at like Disney's Animal Kingdom and what they're doing there, like, it's incredible. Could their conditions be better? Yes. But would they gone extinct if we didn't do this? Also, yes. You know, that's where I'm like, there's a little bit of a thing there. And, you know, aquariums and stuff are giving us the ability to do some research to help preserve animal life outside of these situations. But then again, you also have where, like, how some of the whales have been treated in SeaWorld, that you're like, yeah, that's not good. So overall, Andy, I was just going to throw this to you. How do you think of the question of, like, should we be having these kind of amusement parks with animals featured in it?
Yeah, I think you touched on a lot of the salient questions and issues. You know, I think what's really unfortunate is that the animals that most capture our imagination, our attention, our awe and wonder are the animals that are the most likely to suffer from those kind of situations, right? The animals that have the most complex behaviors, the most, you know, potential for, you know, some kind of consciousness, self-awareness, some kind of inner life, inner experience. So, you know, things like whales, things like gorillas and chimps and monkeys, you know, these and even like the big cats and so forth. Like these are the things that draw people in. But they're also the ones that they need the most room. They need the most stimulation, the most, activity, and different, most variety in their experiences and so forth to be kind of, to have a good quality of life. And so, that it's hard to provide all those in those kind of situations. But if you had a zoo that was just sort of insects, or, single-celled, bacteria or whatever, pond animals, or like nobody would come. You would barely be able to see anything. You'd be like, this is just what I have outside in my backyard that I'm trying to get rid of. Like, I don't want to see this. I think that creates a real conundrum that, where there is a possibility to have kind of value from these things to get people inspired and engaged, also, introduces those difficulties for the animals. I think that a lot of progress has been made in terms of recognizing some of that and building better kinds of enclosures, better kinds of habitats, not just kind of sticking everybody in a little cage, but creating real large enclosures for these animals to roam around in, to have things to interact with. So I think that's positive. I think there are the conservation things and the educational pieces are positive. And I think we've, recognized some mistakes. It's probably the right decision to shut down the SeaWorld things. That that's just too small of a context for those large animals. They need a different situation. And we may not just be able to have an environment in which we can keep an orca in contact with humans on a regular basis like that. And that's unfortunate for the people that enjoyed that, but. We may just have to say, look, there's some limits to this, that I think that's kind of the issue with Jurassic Park, right? Is that the dinosaurs that people are most familiar with are also the dinosaurs that would be least suitable to that kind of attraction because they would need so much space, so much food and all that. You could probably have an actual successful dinosaur theme park that didn't turn into a nightmare, but it would be populated by chicken-sized dinosaurs and dog-sized dinosaurs and smaller things like that rather than Tyrannosaurus and Stegosaurus and so forth, because it wouldn't be practical to do that.
For me, and I've said this on our show before, but I'm going to keep harping on it because I think it's important. I will not go to an amusement park, zoo, or aquarium unless it is AZA accredited. So that is our animal or aquarium and zoo association. So that's where a team of scientists are going in and evaluating whether or not this is actually suitable conditions for the animals and whether or not the research we are doing is actually worth what we're doing to the animals. Like, are we saving more lives or taking more lives? Are kind of the questions that they're asking. So I know SeaWorld and Animal Kingdom and Disney both have lost AZA for a while, but now they are both AZA accredited again. SeaWorld is slowly getting rid of the orcas. I wish they would get rid of them sooner, but there's no way of doing that without killing the orcas, and that's bad too. So it's just problematic. It's not a simple thing, and I think that's what people forget, especially when we're talking about like ocean life. Of like, oh, well, we'll just put them back in the ocean. We've made the ocean so unsuitable for animals. like it's actually just not that much better out there because of what we're doing to our planet. And the best zoos and aquariums, I think, are really showing the harm that we are doing and telling us to do better, even though that will mean probably the end of zoos and aquariums because we won't need them anymore. But I think right now it's kind of a necessary evil. We need to draw people in so that they'll give money so that we can use that money to help the animals, especially with some of the endangered species. I'd especially recommend people looking into what the Knoxville Zoo is doing with red pandas, as well as just kind of what we're doing with like ordinary pandas and like San Diego Zoo. I'm trying to think of some of the other big ones I know that are doing a lot of good. I know Disney's Animal Kingdom does a lot of stuff for African wildlife that's really cool to look into. So if you have the time, look into all that. Some good is being done. And I only word it that way because like if the main story out there was all positive, I'd probably be like, well, here's all the bad that's being done. I just kind of, I'm like, hey, let's nuance our thought and let's have real discussions and think about the positives and negatives of these things. And I think people know some of the negatives, so there are positives too. Look into them. But for now, Andy, we're wrapping this up. But I got to know, if you were going to dress up for Halloween. We're going to a Halloween party. You're dressing up as a character from Jurassic Park. What's your costume?
Yeah, I think as much as probably every man wants to be Jeff Goldblum, I think I'm an Alan Grant. A little bit stuffy, a little bit dad joke. Kind of. But the hat is not a million miles away from the Indiana Jones hat. That's a pretty solid look.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think although every day my beard gets closer and closer to the the Hammond Richard Attenborough beard, but I'm still a few years away from the full Santa Claus look. So we'll stick with Alan Grant for now.
Oh man, Alan Grant's a good one. Obviously I would do Jeff Goldblum's character. Like that's just the easiest one. But if I felt like getting creative, I might try and find a way to dress up as a velociraptor. I just feel like that would it'd be fun. Like you get one of those costumes that's sort of like the T-Rex costume everyone has. But maybe it's just like adjusted to look more like a velociraptor. That'd be fun. I think I'd have a fun time with that. Then I could, and naturally, as I do at every Halloween party, I spend all my time in the kitchen anyway, and everybody would just know what the costume is. It would be great.
Right. And you just have to live with the fact that everybody would be telling you, no, velociraptors are actually only chicken sized.
Yeah. And they'd be like, where's your feathers? And they'd be like, listen, shut up. Good stuff. Well, guys, if you enjoyed this episode, let us know. Leave a rating review on Podchaser if you're on your laptop. If you're on your phone and you're on Spotify, you can hit the little 3 dots. You can do the 5-star. Leave us a rating there. If you're on Apple Podcasts, scroll down and you can leave a rating and review there. All of those help the show and help people see, the algorithm stuff. It's algorithm stuff. Just do it for us, please. If you want to see the rest of our Halloween drive-in horror films that aren't always thought of as horror films, that playlist is found with a link down below in the show's description. We hope you all do one very important thing for us, and remember that we're all a chosen people, a geekdom of priests.